Some will deny this, but the British Tories have made the country more autocratic in a number of ways and not just one. The Tories have passed a number of laws that have increased the powers of the police, making it easier for them to surveil citizens and crack down on protests. For example, the Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 22 gives the police new powers to stop and search people without suspicion and to impose curfews on people in certain areas. And the Tories have also made it more difficult for people to express their views freely. For example, this Police Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act 2022 makes it a criminal offence to intentionally cause a public nuisance by protesting in a way that is noisy or disorderly. And this could be interpreted to mean that even peaceful protests could be banned if they are deemed to be too noisy or disruptive. When I think about all the drums at the demonstrations here, oh boy. And the Tories have also curtailed a number of civil liberties, such as the right to privacy and the right to a fair trial. For example, the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 gives the government broad powers to collect and store data about people's communications without their knowledge or consent. And the Tories have also weakened the rule of law by making it easier for the government to break the law. For example, the Internal Market Act 2020 gives the government the power to override parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol, even though this protocol is part of an international treaty that the UK is legally bound to uphold. This is not through Parliament, but still they tried. And the Tories have appointed a number of judges who are sympathetic to their views, and they have also made it more difficult for judges to challenge government decisions. For example, the Justice Act 22 gives the government the power to sack judges without giving a reason. I only knew this from Eastern Europe so far. And the Tories have reduced the power of Parliament by increasing the power of the Prime Minister. For example, the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011 was repealed, which means that the Prime Minister can now call a snap election whenever he wants or she wants. And the Tories have made it more difficult for people to access information about the government's activities. For example, the Freedom of Information Act 2000 has been weakened, and the government has refused to release information about its plans for Brexit at the time. The Tories have cracked down on dissent by targeting journalists, activists and other critics of the government. For example, the government has threatened to prosecute journalists who publish false or misleading information about the government, and it has banned protests outside Parliament. And the Tories have attacked the media by accusing journalists of being enemies of the people and by threatening to defund the BBC. This has created a climate of fear among journalists, making it more difficult for them to hold the government to account. And the Tories have eroded trust in institutions such as the police, the courts and Parliament by making a number of controversial decisions. For example, the government has been accused of politicizing the police by appointing a number of senior officers who are sympathetic to the Tories. And the Tories have used social media to spread misinformation and propaganda in order to discredit their opponents and to promote their own agenda. And this has created a climate of division and mistrust in society. And the Tories have undermined human rights by making it more difficult for people to challenge government decisions in court. For example, the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 gives the power to the government to collect and store data about people's communications, as I mentioned earlier, and they don't even have to know about this. And the government has proposed a law that would give it power to censor the internet. This law would allow the government to block websites and social media platforms that it deems to be harmful or extremist. This could have a chilling effect on free speech and could be used to silence dissent. And the government has proposed a law that would make it easier for the police to stop and search people. I gave a hint on that earlier in the video, because that would allow the police to stop and search people without suspicion, and it would also allow the police to search people's phones and laptops. And this could be used to target minority groups and to stifle political dissent, or stifle or stifle. Correct me in the comments, please. The government has proposed a law that would make it easier for the government to deport people who are deemed to be undesirable. This law would give the government the power to deport people who are not British citizens, even if they have been living in the UK for many years. And this could be used to target immigrants and to create a climate of fear. And these are just some of the ways in which the British Tories have made the country more autocratic. These changes have indeed been met with concern from many people who believe that they are a threat to democracy and the rule of law. It's also important to note that the British Tories are not the only political party that has made proposals that could be seen as autocratic. I'm always trying to be fair. Other parties, such as the Labour Party, have also made proposals that could have a negative impact on democracy and the rule of law. However, the British Tories have been the most vocal in their support for these proposals, and they have been the most active in trying to implement them. It's important to be aware of these trends and to speak out against them. All of us need to defend our democracies and the rule of law, and we all need to make sure that these values are not eroded. One of the problems is that the UK does not have a codified constitution, which means that there is no single document that sets out the basic principles of government and the rights of citizens. Instead, the UK's constitution is made up of a variety of sources, including statutes, court rulings, and conventions. This lack of a codified constitution makes it easier for the government to make changes to the way the country is run. In a country with a codified constitution, any changes to the constitution would require a special process, such as a referendum or a vote in parliament with certain majorities. However, in the UK, the government can make changes to the constitution simply by passing a law. That's not possible here in Germany. This means that the government has a lot of power to change the way the country is run, without having to go through a lot of checks and balances. And this can make it easier for the government to become more autocratic, as they, as I said, can simply pass laws that give them more power and restrict the rights of citizens. For example, the government could pass a law that gives the government the power to censor the internet completely, or a law that makes it completely illegal to protest against the government. These laws would be very difficult to challenge in court, as there is no codified constitution to protect the rights of citizens. Of course, the government could also use its power to make changes that are beneficial to citizens. However, the lack of a codified constitution means that there is no way to guarantee that the government will use its power in a way that is beneficial to citizens. And this is why some people believe that the UK should adopt a codified constitution. A codified constitution would indeed make it more difficult for the government to become more autocratic, as any changes to the constitution would require a special process I mentioned earlier. And here, for example, you would need a 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament to change our constitution. But there are a few ways that the UK could adopt a codified constitution. One way would be for Parliament to pass a law that creates a codified constitution under the current ways it works. And this law would set out the basic principles of government and the rights of citizens. And the law would also set out a process for amending the constitution. Another way that the UK could adopt a codified constitution would be through a referendum. As you all know, a referendum is a vote in which all eligible citizens are asked to vote on a particular issue. In this case, the issue would be whether or not the UK should adopt a codified constitution. If a majority of voters vote in favor of adopting a codified constitution, then Parliament would be required to pass a law that creates a codified constitution. And finally, the UK could adopt a codified constitution through a constitutional convention. A constitutional convention is a meeting of representatives from all parts of society to discuss and agree on a new constitution. If a constitutional convention is able to agree on a new constitution, then Parliament would be required to pass a law that gives effect to the constitution. Whichever way the UK chooses to adopt a codified constitution, if that ever happens, it is important that the process is open and democratic. All eligible citizens could have a say in it, whether or not the UK adopts a codified constitution, and the process in any way should be transparent and accountable. And I can tell you, it's annoying sometimes when the Constitutional Court here in Germany has a different opinion than what I'm thinking about a law that just passed the Bundestag and then is sent back by the Constitutional Court. But especially with our history, we know why we need a proper set of checks and balances. And other countries didn't have these experiences in their own country, and that's why a lot of people don't think that this is necessary. But believe me, when we see all the things happening all over the world and the developments of governments getting more autocratic all over the world, even in what we all thought were safe democratic countries, everybody needs a good set of check and balances, and one of them is a codified constitution with all that comes with this codified constitution. And if you want to know more about Brexit or UK politics, the next video is here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.